You notice someone across the fire. Your pulse shifts before your mind does. Before you have a single conscious thought about that person, your body has already made a decision. And here is the part that should unsettle you. That decision is not yours. It belongs to every ancestor who survived long enough to reproduce. Going back 300,000 years, and right now it is running through you, like a program you did not write and cannot turn off. What you call attraction is a survival algorithm. And it was built for a world so different from yours that if you were dropped into it today, you would not recognize the rules at all, because everything you think you know about how ancient humans found a mate is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, structurally, almost completely wrong. And once you understand how it actually worked, you will never look at your own instincts the same way again. Start with the size of the world. Your ancestors did not live on a planet. They lived in a band. Anthropologist Dunbar spent decades mapping the social architecture of hunter-gatherer groups and found that the intimate daily band, the people you slept near, moved with, shared food with, typically held between 25 and 50 individuals, that was your entire social world. Not your city, not your school. 50 people for your entire life. So ask the obvious question. In a group of 50, roughly half are the wrong sex. A large portion of the remaining 25 are too old, too young, or too closely related. How many viable mates did you actually have access to, day to day? Maybe 5, maybe 10. People you had known your entire life. People you had seen frightened, hungry, generous, petty. There were no first impressions. There was only accumulated evidence, and that accumulated evidence was the whole system. But here is the problem it created. If you only ever mate within a group that small, generation after generation, the genetics collapse. Your ancestors knew this not as a scientific principle, but as a deep cultural taboo. Incest prohibitions appear in virtually every human society ever studied. One of the most universal features of human life on Earth. The pull away from the familiar was wired into your nervous system before anyone called it a rule. So how did you meet a stranger in a world where strangers were, by definition, a potential threat? The answer is one of the most elegant social technologies your species ever invented. And almost no one talks about it. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years living among the Ju-Huanxi, San people of the Kalahari, and documented a practice she called hxaro, long-distance gift exchange maintained between bands across hundreds of kilometers. You gave someone a string of ostrich shell beads. They gave you an arrow point. Months later, you gave something else. They gave back. The objects were irrelevant. What you were building, slowly, was a web of mutual obligation that stretched beyond your band into the lives of people you might only see once a season. And that web gave you a reason to travel. A reason to gather. A reason to be in the same place as people whose faces you had never seen. When resources concentrated, when fruit ripened, when antelope moved to predictable water, multiple bands converged. And before they arrived, they prepared to be seen. Archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood's excavations at Blombos Cave on the southern tip of South Africa uncovered ochre pigments and drilled shell beads dating back 75,000 to 100,000 years. Personal ornamentation that ancient was not decoration. It was a signal broadcast across a clearing before a single word was exchanged. I am healthy, I am here. I am someone worth looking at. You were advertising yourself before you opened your mouth. You always have been. Now here is where everything inverts. You were not looking for the most attractive person at the gathering. Your nervous system is far more sophisticated than that, and far more ruthless. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist who has spent decades studying the neuroscience of human attachment, found that the brain of a person newly in love activates the caudate nucleus and ventral tegmental area, regions flooded with dopamine, the same circuitry that drives hunger and addiction. This was evolution locking in a behavior so critical to survival, it used the same neural hardware as eating and breathing. But what triggered that system? What actually set it off? Not symmetry, not height. What your ancestors' nervous systems were scanning for, what yours is still scanning for right now, was competence under pressure. Trustworthiness when it costs something. The way someone behaves in a moment when no one important is watching. Anthropologist Kim Hill spent years with the Ache people of Paraguay and found that women exercise genuine, active choice in mate selection. Families negotiated. Elders calculated alliance value. But the individuals involved had real power in the final decision. And what drove that decision was not a transaction. It was something that looked, from the inside, very much like love, which means your ancestors were not choosing a person. They were choosing a person plus everything that person came with. Their band, their networks, their grandmother who knew where water stayed during drought years, their reputation across 3 seasons of gatherings. When you chose them, you were choosing an entry point into a web of survival. Now picture the gathering. Third night. The ochre, the beads, the careful performances of the first day have settled into something quieter. Fires are lower. The air smells of wood smoke and dry grass. And across the camp, someone has caught your attention again. Not because they performed well on the first day, but because on the second day, when the meat spoiled and people grew tense, you watched how they handled it. They gave their portion away without making it visible. They absorbed the difficulty without pulling focus to themselves. The smoke drifted. The fire crackled. Your body registered it before your mind named it. Information has traveled the way it always travels in a group this small, instantly and completely. A cousin in their band has spoken to a cousin in yours. Food was offered at the communal meal and accepted. Not a declaration, a signal. In a world where everyone sees everything, reputation is the only currency that matters. If the pull is mutual, there is no ceremony. No proposal. No announcement. You begin to move through the world together. You sleep in the same part of camp. The community recognizes the bond, not by witnessing a ritual, but by watching your behavior shift, until the new shape of things becomes obvious to everyone. And here is the final truth. The one that reframes everything. That bond was not designed to be permanent. Across virtually every hunter-gatherer society studied, pair bonds dissolved and reformed with a regularity that would look, by modern standards, like serial failure. But it was not failure. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy built the case that human children, the most helpless, most cognitively demanding offspring of any primate, were never meant to be raised by 2 people alone. They required alloparents, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, unrelated band members who invested genuine care alongside the biological parents. 2 parents was never the design. It was always the village. The pair bond was real. The love was real. The dopamine, the obsession, the grief when it ended, all of it was real. But it was one thread in a much larger net. Now think about what you actually do today. You open an app. You see a photograph curated from 40 attempts by someone who knew you were looking. You make a judgment in under a second on inputs your nervous system was never built to process. No shared labor, no crisis, no observation of how they treat someone who cannot help them. No web of people who have watched them across seasons and can tell you what they are really like. Your brain is running a 300,000-year-old algorithm on data it was never designed to receive. And it is doing its best. It really is. That is why you notice how someone treats the waiter. That is why you register warmth or its absence before you have words for what you felt. That is why competence in a small moment, someone helping without being asked, someone absorbing difficulty without making it visible, hits you somewhere you cannot quite explain. These are not romantic instincts. They are ancient diagnostic tools, still calibrated, still accurate, still asking the only question that ever mattered. Can I trust this person when it costs them something? Sit with that for a moment. You notice someone across the fire. Your pulse shifts before your mind does. Your body has already decided. Not by you, not by culture, but by every ancestor who asked this same question in a gathering just like this one, 300,000 years before you were born, and got the answer right enough to survive. You are still asking, every single time,